Okay, so this is going to be a very quick tutorial on some of the features to build terrain inside of Unreal. So I just have the third person demo coming up here, and I deleted the walls just so we could see some of the terrain here. So let's get started with this. So I'm going to click on landscape, and what you see is this big green grid here. This is actually the preview of how big our landscape is. Some things I'll just talk about very quickly. I'm not going to go too in depth to it, but let's just say let's not mess with any of this here. We're going to keep this where it is, and this is really where we'll live to really determine the size of our plane here. So quads, if I bring this down, it's going to make a smaller space, and this is all going to depend on what type of level you're building, what kind of console you're going on, or what type of, if it's a mobile phone. A lot of this kind of gets determined before you start building, so it'll make a bigger difference with your footprint depending on where you're going with it. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to keep this. Whoops, I'm going to keep this relatively small, but we'll play around with it. You can see my scale. I have the guy in there. Number of, so when we change these, if I change these to 15 by 15, you can see it's going to actually make this a little bigger. So it's actually changing my square sizes as well. Um, so that's going to be let me just pull this over. You can see the number of components. That's going to be 15 by 15 inside of each one of those squares. Resolution, the higher this is, the more complex it's going to be, the longer it's going to take to do things. For now, I'm going to keep this right where it is for now. All I'm going to do now is hit create, let it do its thing, and now I have my canvas, so I can start painting on my terrain here and start sculpting. So I'm going to go ahead. You can see I'm in Sculpt, and I have some tools here. So if I go ahead and just, you can see, and much like any terrain editor that you've been in the past, they all really work the same. I use my brackets. I can make my brush a little smaller, and I'm just going to kind of pull across my canvas here. And you can see it has it added some a bit of a bump on there, right? So let's just talk about the brush. We have our strength, which is obvious. The higher that is, the higher up it will go. My brush size, again, that's obvious. That's the size of my brush. And then my brush fall off is just that circle in the middle that allows that fall off from the hard edge to the soft. So if we want to dig in, I'm going to hold shift, and that will allow me to start digging in a little bit. Right, and if I change that fall off a little bit, we can go and bring that further out. You can see how that's going to have an impact. And if I take my strength, you can see that's just going to, just like anything. So we know, we get how those work, but let's get to some of the more interesting things here, right? Let me play with the fall off a little bit more here. Here we go. So if I click on my sculpt tools, there's all kinds of different things that we can hit here. And really you should experiment with these. So if I go into smooth, it'll actually smooth out some of my topology here. If I go to, whoops, if I go to flatten, that will flatten an area out. Whatever level I'm on, it will flatten out. Now, if I come in here and I'm in this little gullet, it will, now you can see what's happening is it's trying to figure out what level I'm on. Let me just undo that. If I come in here and I start flattening now, nice and slow, it'll flatten it out wherever I put my mouse down, is that's where it's going to go. It'll either bring it up or it will bring it down. Like over here, you can see that it's bringing it down. I haven't let up on my left mouse click. So you can see if as I go through here, the first place I clicked on is the level in which it will flatten. Okay. So if I go over to, we have a couple more things here. I'm going to go right to erosion real quick, and that's just going to kind of mess a little bit with your topology. And I'm going to go to ramp. What's cool about ramp is I can click on one spot. Whoops. And now you can see I have this ramp here. You can see there's two little mountains. If I take this and I bring it up, it's going to create, and I hit enter, it will create a ramp for me. And no matter where I bring that, hit enter, it's going to create a ramp. So I'm going to go ahead back to my sculpt tool so you can kind of see what that's done. And if I want to, I can go in and kind of manipulate around and try to make this feel like it's a little bit more integrated. Now, I can also go into I did flatten, I did my smooth. Maybe I want this to be a little smoother over here. I went to erosion. I don't really mess with that. We'll go to noise. So with noise, this really works as a bigger brush. Let me move over to show you this. So I'm going to grab my brush and just make it really big. And with noise, you can see that it's pretty strong right now. If I'm just clicking, I mean, it's a big brush. So let's make it a little smaller so we can kind of mess around a little bit. So it randomly will affect, it brings stuff down and up. Now, I'm probably going to bring my strength down a little bit. I'm going to undo those moves for a second. Maybe that's a little bit too strong. Let's keep bringing our strength down a little bit more. Bring our brush size down a little bit. Now, as you can see here with the brush size, it's so small, it's not really being able to affect it. So you got to make sure it's at least a little bit bigger and that your strength is doing what you want it to. Let's play with our fall off here, see what that does. And really a lot of, this is just a lot of experimentation, right? So let's take the scale and bring that down a little bit on the noise and see what it does. All right. So there's so much you can do with really playing around with these settings. All right, let's take the strength and jack it way up. Maybe we'll make some mountains back here. And the nice part is it's somewhat random. Now, you might not want to use a noise because it is a bit random, but you want to be careful. So I'm gonna hit on retopologize, and what that's gonna do is if we look over here, and let me grab some just a little. Yeah, there we go. So if we look at this, it's all stretched out, and you can see those checkers. They're also really stretched out. I'm just gonna come in here and start hitting that. Just make my brush a little smaller. And that'll help clean up some of this stretching that's happening. It's subtle, but it's definitely happening. As you can see there, it's just going to try to clean up so the textures don't stretch as much. It'll do pretty good, but it'll just go so far. So, and I'm just going to go back to flatten for a second so you can see a little bit. If I wanted to flatten something, I can very easily. I could make these little cliffs, make a path if I wanted to. If I wanted to, I'm just going to real quick go back to my sculpt. And if I hold down shift, I can dig down into that. And if I wanted to turn that into a nice flattened area, I can like that. All right, so there's a lot you can do with these tools. Again, you can change the type of fall off you have. It can be linear, so you can see that'll flatten things out a little bit more. Let's go to our sculpt so you can see what that looks like. So there's a lot you can do with these brushes, and it's really about experimentation. So this is a bit of the intro to just being able to sculpt within Unreal's terrain editor.